2017, I was toiling away in a bear market at a gold company called JDL Gold Corp. And over the time that I was there, we started at about a $20 million company and went through a series of mergers and acquisitions, probably the most important of which was a merger with Luna Gold Corp, who was then headed by Christian Milau, who went on to become the CEO of the combined entity. Today, that company is called Equinox Gold Corp, and Christian has led it with the help of Ross Beatty, the chairman, and Greg Smith, the president, from a small sort of startup mining company to a multi-billion-dollar mid-tier producer. It has been one of the biggest successes in the gold space in this cycle. Now, the first time I met Christian was shortly after the merger. We had a bit of a get-to-know-you drinks, and we were drinking wine in the new Equinox office. And, he was talking a lot about his education, his background, the really interesting work that he'd done as an accountant, as an investment banker, as a builder and leader of companies. And I could tell very early on that he was a very smart, very humble, and very, very thoughtful person. And when I started the Resource Insider podcast, he was one of the top guests that I wanted to get on here. And now it has taken me several years to do that. We've done dozens of episodes, but I've finally got him in the studio today. So I'm very excited to bring listeners Christian Milao. I think you're going to get a lot out of this conversation. If you want to see how these really sort of quite big producing mining companies are actually built and the nuts and bolts that it really takes to pull these together. But more importantly, I think this conversation is an excellent example of just the kind of people that work in the mining industry. Very passionate, very adventurous, very interesting and thoughtful people. And I don't think that this gets expressed well enough. And it's one of the reasons I was so excited to have Christian on today. So I think you'll enjoy it. I know I did. Thank you for listening. Without further ado, let me please introduce Christian Milao, CEO of Equinox Gold Corp. All right. I would say 4 years in the making, dozens of requests. Finally joining us today on the Resource Insider podcast is Mr. Christian Milao from Equinox Gold, my old boss, one of the first people I worked for here in Vancouver. Very excited to have you in here today.
No, it's great to be here. I know I resisted for a long time, but I'm excited to do this.
How did I do it? How did I finally get you over the line to be on the podcast?
Oh no, I think we've been watching what you've been doing, obviously, since you left us, and you've been doing a great job, and respect what you're doing, and kind of excited to share my story as well at times. Like I actually do enjoy that part of our job. Is I see also young people coming through and their careers grow in that. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I feel like, when you're embellishing on your own career and that you feel like you're boasting and things, but I actually enjoy seeing people flourish in our sector. And I think actually you've done a good job post leaving us, and it's great to see, and congrats to you too.
Well, thank you. And, I appreciate you saying that. And that's really why I started the podcast, because I was a very active listener to business podcasts in general, in other sectors. And, throughout my career, I'd met so many interesting people in mining that had done very, very interesting, really cool stuff. And it never really saw the light of day if you didn't have the chance to have a beer with these people or work with them or get exposure to them. So the whole goal of this is to sort of tell the story behind the people in the sector. And today we're going to do that about you. So, Christian, for people who have not ever heard of you before, who are you? What do you do? 30,000 foot.
And hopefully there are a lot of people who have never heard of me, because that's part of what I enjoy about I think what we're creating is it's not about the person in a sense, it's about what we're creating as a company and as a team. And for me, that's always been an incredibly important thing. And I found that I'm just a curious person learning all the way through my career. And I've worked through different sectors over the years and experienced many different things. And for me, it's about working with great people and coming from hopefully a humble place and picking up skill sets along the way and really just working and managing through with people. And if you want to dig into my history, you're welcome to, but I'll let you direct it.
Mm-hmm. But right now, you're the CEO of Equinox Gold. You've been doing that for 5-6 years now, I believe.
Yeah, it's past the 5-year mark.
Okay. Before that, you were CEO of other companies, you were a investment banker, you were an accountant, you were a CFO. So you've had a range of roles in this sector. And, when I was thinking about where we should start this conversation today, one of the things that kind of kept coming to mind is I think few people really, really appreciate how hard the mining business is to make money, to build successful companies. As of today, we're in a bit of a hit in the market right now. I'm looking at my charts. I'm seeing a lot of red. I'm seeing a lot of good companies get decimated. And I know how frustrating that can be for management teams who are doing everything right. And I think a good way to illustrate some of the challenges that management teams have to work on here and have to address is I'd like to talk about your experience with True Gold in Burkina Faso and the pretty intense challenges that you guys had to address there before you were able to sell this company to Endeavor. Can you kind of give people a snapshot of what was going on at True Gold when you joined and place us where were you in time at this point?
Yeah, I'm actually going to step back, if you don't mind, a little bit further, because the risk or the challenge that I wanted to take on there kind of stems from other experiences and I guess building confidence over time. And there's lots of stuff pre my mining experience, but I'll start with mining. If you want to go into the pre-mining, I'm happy to do that later too. But when I first got involved with New Gold, I remember it was the summer, I think, of 2008. And if you remember that well, the world collapsed in the late part of 2008. And it's sort of like, it feels like I've gone from crisis to crisis in the industry, although we have nice periods of upturns too. But you learn to work through crises, work with experienced people who've seen cycles, you get confidence, you learn also that cycles are your friend in a way too. And so right away there, I thought we were going to go bankrupt and we had no money and we were building a huge project, New Afton in BC, and how were we going to do it? But I was pretty naive going into the sector and working with, it was Ian Telfer and Pierre Lassonde and eventually Randall Oliphant and Bob Gallagher and Jim Curry and all that. I worked through that period with them, and they're all very experienced people relative to where I was in my career when I jumped in. And you learn that you can actually make a difference as a management team and make decisions as a board and management. And so I built a little confidence in New Gold. Then I went on and got tapped to join Endeavor Mining, and Neil Woodyer, Frank Juster, and others were looking to build a company in West Africa. And I thought, what a great opportunity to go see Africa, to use my investment banking skills, because they also owned Endeavor Financial at the time, and they owned half of a mine in Burkina Faso, which I'd almost never heard of, actually.
Half a mine.
Half a mine. Okay. They only owned 50% of Etruscan at the time. So it was actually a really challenging situation.
Who owned the other 50%?
I'm trying to remember. I think it was still publicly listed because they had done that just before I joined. And so I thought, what a great opportunity. And they want to build a gold mining company. And I really enjoyed it. And I thought Africa would be a great place to do it as well. So I moved to Monaco.
And you were CFO in that role.
I was CFO in that role. And it was some of the toughest years of my life. I think I spent 5 years trying to buy assets, put them together. And it was starting in 2011. So I joined at a great time again. And the gold price fell off a cliff. And we started putting assets together. But I noticed the resourcefulness of the team. And actually a number of them are working with us here, interesting, at Equinox. But Neil and Frank and the ability to actually look through challenges, continue to build in a downturn and difficult times, even though you don't have a lot of access to capital in that. And again, I built a bit more confidence. And so then one day, I guess this is a kind of a funny little story, but I got an email. I remember sitting there in Monaco and working on something, and it was from, I think, Corn Ferry or one of the recruitment groups. And it said something about CEO job. And I was like, oh, someone's, or trying to place someone or whatever. And I was like, I'm just about to push delete. And I thought, I'll read this one. And it was actually them looking to put someone into a CEO role in a challenge company in West Africa. And so I thought, okay, I'll make this call to see what's going on. I've got experience here. Neil gave me a lot of opportunity to do investor relations and other things that are non-traditional CFO, work with governments, negotiate agreements with them, community relations and that. So I called them up, and it was actually Mark O'Day, Nolan Watson, and a few of the others over at Oxygen that had put together, obviously, True Gold, and it was in Burkina Faso. And they'd had an attack on site, and they were looking for someone to come in as CEO, and they sort of stretched the market and were looking wider than the traditional CEO group. And I guess my experience jumped out, and I came out and met them, and I just thought, oh, geez, there's some good people behind this company. It's a chance to come to Vancouver to become a CEO. And I also looked at the share price and the situation, and I think it had fallen to 16, 18 cents a share from wherever it was originally, but much higher, multiples higher. And I thought, geez, these things are solvable. You go down, you work with people, work with governments, you find a way to solve these problems in communities, and you can get back to work. And I thought, I'll take that risk. And if I fail, well, it was already in a difficult spot, but I actually have the confidence that we can solve this. And my family stayed in Monaco, finished off the school year, and then moved back to Vancouver. But I came back to Vancouver, and literally within a few days, I think I was on a plane back to Burkina, and I said, I'm not coming home until this is solved. And, Mark and Nolan and the other board members there put the confidence in me. And interestingly, I remember sitting down with the Prime Minister, and it was such an interesting situation where, there'd been a coup in the country, there'd been an attack on site locally, and the Prime Minister and the Minister of Mines, and I think the Minister of Interior were two of them were generals, ex-generals, and the other one was, I can't remember, colonel.
And was this the original government or the
this was
of the coup?
This was the group that took over the government after Compaoré wanted to be in power beyond 30 years and beyond the terms that he was allowed to be. And people just said no more, and they had a coup, and effectively, and the military supported them and took over. And they said, we want to go to a transition in a year or so. You hear that often, and you sort of say,
transition to a democratic
government. Yeah. And you go, okay, right. I tell you something, when I walked out of that year spending time with those groups of people and those generals and that, I have so much respect for them. They wanted to do better for their country. I genuinely believe that. And I remember sitting down with them. We were probably the biggest investor at the time, and it was Franco-Nevada and Sandstorm backing us with the money. And so probably at that time, the biggest investment coming into the country, and mining is probably the biggest sector as well. And I remember walking into the presidential or prime ministerial palace with our local advisor, and I can't remember who, there's one other person with me. And we walked down this red carpet, and it was this long hallway, and we sat down, and we went into this room, and it was the Prime Minister alone. He had a pad of paper, and he had a pen. And he took notes and listened to our challenges and issues. And we said, we need to get back to work here. We need to get the rains behind our dam so we can actually start up this mine when the dry season comes. And he said, look, I'll have you back to work by May 1st.
When was it at this point?
This was probably March. It was not far away.
So this was a huge priority for them.
Huge priority. And then May 15th, we were back at work. And I tell you something, I walked out of there going, these people had to fear for their families. He sent his family, I believe, to Canada actually to protect them at the time, because he was trying to make change, but there's always going to be differing factions. And,
right.
There was a worry that obviously it would go in reverse, but actually they got to a democratic election and they had a government, and he stepped out of power, and I actually haven't followed up. I'd like to know where he is right now, but I had so much respect for them because they wanted the investment. And I tell you, in mining, sometimes some countries don't want our investment, despite what I think we do is a wonderful thing for communities, and we actually do pretty well with the environment despite what most people would think. And so I really gained number one, some confidence there. We turned the share price into, I can't remember, it hit 57, I think, when we did the deal with Endeavour to sell it within 13 months. And I knew Endeavour, we actually ended up selling it to Endeavour, and by the end of the deal, it had doubled again. So it was up 7-8 times from a year ago. And so I guess you build some confidence doing that, but it felt fairly simple in a sense. It was about relationships, people going down there, spending the time and working through things. It could have gone wrong as well, but I tell you, I pinch myself and look back, and I'm glad I took that risk, because it could have been easier to walk into a company or a situation that's obviously share price is good, you got money and things are going well, where this situation was harder, but also you learn and you get experience. And to be honest, you usually get monetary reward when you're successful, and joining a company that's on its knees or doing it in a difficult place is a better place to start, in my view, sometimes.
Okay. You touched on a couple of things, because I got a lot of follow-up questions to that. My first one is, when you joined the company, did you invest in it?
I absolutely did.
Because they were beaten down to 16 cents. You said they were, a fraction of what they'd previously been.
Well, we could probably go on here for a couple hours. I got to tell you another story about how I became, I guess, an investor and started believing that. When I first joined New Gold, I'd been an investment banker in London, moved back to Vancouver, and I had my first kid. And my wife and I were like, okay, let's figure things out now. And so I just started looking around for roles and opportunities. And I actually joined Deloitte in their financial advisory services, and started advising companies on little deals in the Fraser Valley and some in Ontario and things. And I ended up helping New Gold do their three-way merger in terms of integration. And that was my first exposure to an amazing group of people. And at that time, I just felt that I either want to buy my own business and kind of run it and be the owner. And I actually had negotiated a deal, paid a commitment fee, and had HSBC put aside some money for us to buy a business out in the Fraser Valley. And then I had this opportunity at New Gold. And I remember it was in 2007 markets felt a little wobbly. I was like taking on debt, putting your house as collateral. I just thought, it's probably not the best way to go right now. And I thought it was a really interesting company and New Gold and the people. And I thought, well, I'm going to go that way. And so again, I wanted to be an owner, or at least feel engaged and part of the decision-making, and ultimately feel the rewards from succeeding or not. And so instead of owning the business, I ended up joining New Gold because I felt I could invest in it. And so I put some money into that myself. I can't remember how much I bought. I mean, I probably put $200,000 in, which was a lot of money for me back then. And when I left, I think when I joined, the share price was, I can't remember, $4 or $5. It had fallen to 86 cents. I still remember that number when Clopper collapsed in 2008. But then when I left, I think it was between $12 and $14. And so that was my first real experience with, wow, these cycles. And when you build something, it's great. It can actually go up in a significant way. And so when I joined, I reinvested that money that I made there into True Gold. And I was just buying shares in the market. I don't think we did any financings, equity financings. While I was there.
Bought it all in the market?
I bought it all in the market.
And did you replicate this at Endeavor as well?
And I did the exact same thing at Endeavor. And at Endeavor, unfortunately, because I joined in 2011, actually I bought call it an interim peak. So that one was a tougher time. I actually bought that at a higher price and suffered the downturn, but I started dollar cost averaging down to a certain degree as well.
So did that experience sort of joining New Gold at a trough, at a bad point in the company's, at least sort of financial history, joining Endeavor at a peak, and then kind of influence your decision in, why you chose a job at a company, in this case, True Gold, that was, essentially in as tough a position as a mining company can be in?
Yeah, I never would have taken that risk or that opportunity at True Gold. I don't think if I hadn't experienced those sort of peaks and troughs and the challenges, because you really don't learn from the easy days and the easy times. And when you're just making money and getting a salary and stuff, you really don't build confidence or learn much. But it's those really challenging situations where you build the confidence, and also it's the people too. And I everyone always says that, but it's so fundamental. Follow good people.
So you saw that it was backed by good people, and were you kind of, excited to take on the opportunity to try to fix it? There's lower hanging fruit for a first time CEO, right? There's a lot of drill plays in the Golden Triangle you could have been running if you'd so chosen.
I was so scared and so excited all in one. Because, being a first time CEO, I was kind of like, you don't necessarily know the ropes, but actually I felt I'd had a very broad experience. So I kind of knew what I'd seen good and bad things through working with various companies and people. And I was hoping I could grab the good things from most of them and adapt it to my culture and style. And that's something that I built more and more confidence in over the years as we moved between companies. And I look at all the companies I've been in, and they're all been great people behind them. And I kind of go, was I really masterminding that, or was I kind of a little bit lucky? But the first one was the first board was amazing. Ian Telfer, Pierre Lassonde, Randolph, and Bob Gallagher, all those people, which had done really amazing things. And then it was Frank Juster and Neil Woodyear and Ian Cockerell, and people had done some amazing things in Africa as well. And then it was Mark O'Day, Nolan, and that, and I learned a lot from them. And then recently, obviously, Ross Beatty and Marshall Koval and Richard Wark was involved in the early days, and Lucas Lundin as an investor. And so it's been really nice to meet those people. So
shortly after your success at True Gold, when it was sold to Endeavor, is when I met you. And you talked a lot already about sort of the importance of building a team. And what was I thought really interesting when I met you is you'd kind of pulled out a lot of the key people that you'd worked with at True Gold, and I believe some of them Endeavor as well, right? And brought them kind of onto the next thing. And you guys were sort of on the hunt for your next project, your next company, right? And you landed on what was Luna Gold and eventually became Equinox Gold. I want to ask, how is it you think you've been able to hold that team of people together through 2-3+ companies over the years? Because you do see occasionally, but rarely, I would say, in the sort of the level of cohesiveness that you built. And that was something that I first noticed when we started working together, because we were part of a merger, and I came from one side and you came from the other side, and your team was very, very defined and kind of absorbed everything around it. So is this something you learned from someone? Is this something that sort of naturally occurred, or were you quite deliberate in how you built that team up?
I think I was reasonably deliberate in the way I wanted to do it in terms of building the culture and finding the people that would fit in. And I guess you do meet people in your career along the way that hopefully fit into that. And I guess you look at our team now, you've got some people, ex-New Gold, ex-Endeavor, Greg Smith and his team came in, and we kind of brought a few of them in as well. And you just try and fit those cultures together. And that, to me, that's the key work, is actually managing personalities, cultures, and fitting people in. And I do one business book that I think Greg and I are always talking about, The Outsiders, which I love. They focus on the right people on the bus and the culture, et cetera, and capital allocation. And then they put their head down and try and get the job done. And, I can't remember any one single CEO's name from that book, but the companies were outstanding. And that's kind of the thing that I think we as a group love and trying to build. And I'm very happy to also work with people who are big personalities like Ross Beatty and that have been super successful over many years in many companies. And my focus is on actually that culture, the people. And if you can pick up a few people on the way and keep the ball rolling, I think you do build culture and trust and support. And I think one of my styles is being very open and communicative, I hope. And it gets harder as you grow bigger, for sure. And I don't always do the perfect job of it, but I want to be vulnerable, open, and talk to people and allow them to keep that open door policy very effective.
Yeah.
And it's not always easy when you get bigger.
And there's a lot of egos in the mining sector.
There certainly are.
And you guys have kept yours pretty small, I would say.
Hopefully, yeah.
And something that's strange about Equinox is you've kind of got, 3 leaders at the top of it as well, too, right? I mean, there's often that old saying that, there can only be one captain of any ship or what have you. But you've got Ross Beatty, one of the most successful mining entrepreneurs of all time, as your chairman. Yourself, obviously a successful entrepreneur and company runner as CEO. Greg Smith as president, also successful company builder and seller. How does that all work together? We've had both Ross and Greg on here, and I don't think either of them have answered that question well. So it comes down to you.
Yeah. One of the things, I just love working with them because it's a really creative entrepreneurial environment. And there's a few more people that probably belong in that top group as well that are in the team, Pete and Doug and Corny now's joined and a few others, Seb. But yeah, it's just, I think, a respect and a trust and hopefully a building of a relationship. And as Ross kind of said, maybe Greg and I don't have egos, so we don't try and grab the spotlight necessarily. And, I think we built trust over a long period of time now together. And I think we all contribute a little bit differently. And that's, I think, critical to any team. And it goes wider than just the 3 of us. But I really believe you should put people around you that are better than you, that have different skill sets than you, that are willing to challenge you. And I think that's the culture that we build. And I hope and I do believe that people value that. And when you look around, I think of every person that reports to me in the company, they're all better than me. Maybe a little more narrowly focused than me, but they're probably better than me at what they actually do. And I think a lot of leaders are afraid to have people who are better than them because it can challenge you. Like, some people don't like any of the management team talking to board members and that. I don't mind that, because hopefully I have enough confidence in myself and the team and trust between each other and all of us that you can be vulnerable as well.
Yeah.
And it's a hard skill and it takes time, I think, to get comfortable with that. And you have to trust the people that you're working with.
A lot of the people that listen to this podcast are not just the CEOs of mining companies, but they're younger people in their career in their 20s or 30s. Often technical people, whether that's mining or geology or finance as well, and they're looking for ways to get involved in great growing companies, maybe start their companies of their own. What advice would you have for them in order to sort of to build their career in a way that they can work towards a leadership position?
Yeah, one thing that I think hopefully I've demonstrated is take some risks along the way. Sometimes you go into a situation you're not 100% confident about because information is never perfect and you're going to have to sometimes take some risks on imperfect information and situations. Follow great people for sure and don't follow the money. It just sounds almost counterintuitive sometimes, but don't jump into a job for a salary or to pay a mortgage or whatever, in my view. But some people need that or want that comfort or that level of certainty, and that's okay. But if you do want to get to a senior leadership or run your own company or be an entrepreneur, you got to sometimes take that risk. And so don't go for the salary. Be willing to take less up front and take some equity risk, or put some of your own money into it. And so many people think they are risk takers, but they aren't really.
It's funny you say that because that is a seemingly consistent quality almost every really successful person I've talked to has. And I can even say in my own life, almost everything that's worked out really well is something I was just doing because I was interested in it, and I would have done it anyway. I mean, this podcast is a perfect example. I didn't really ever assume it would turn into anything, and it's opened a lot of doors for me. But these are just conversations I wanted to start having. And I think it's true for almost everyone. They were just curious about something.
And if you go back, I assume, well, maybe you didn't touch on that with Ross or Greg. I think there's periods and times where they didn't take any bonuses. I think Greg didn't even take a salary for a couple of years there, or he took it all in equity or something. And I think Ross in the early days at Pan Am, he would say he never got a bonus. So I don't know if he uses that against me, but people who are willing to do that are willing to go a mile to make it really successful and are really committed quite often.
Okay. I want to ask you about mining, and I ask almost everyone this question who comes on here is, how do you view the role of luck in the mining industry?
Well, it plays a big part, I think, of a lot of what people do, and I think maybe too many people in the industry would consider themselves smarter rather than lucky, and I think luck's a big part of it. You do need to put yourself in the right place and the right situations and have the financing to make your luck, but some of it's going to be luck. But there are clearly some people, and Ross is probably one of them, where he's had 15 successful companies, so it's probably a bit more than luck with him. And Lucas Lundin and Richard and a few others. But there are also people that have been pretty lucky and cash out, and they kind of go, I'm great. And you kind of go, maybe they're in the right place at the right time. Maybe they put themselves there, so it's more than luck, but I think there's definitely luck.
Yeah.
That's a big part.
But some people you kind of meet, and I think like they were always going to be lucky, right? Like a guy like Ross is a perfect example, right? And it might not have happened when it would have happened, but maybe it was the next year, the next year, and the next year. And, I'm just curious to get people's thoughts on this, and especially as an investor as well, because I know you invest in a lot of different companies outside of Equinox and what have you. How do you view positioning yourself so that you have the biggest chance of getting lucky? Do you spread yourself across different deals, different commodities, different sectors? What's your view to sort of maximize your potential of getting lucky? Because
as an investor, you mean?
As an investor in this sector, yeah.
I'm not great at it because it's a very emotional game, investing, and I do know, and I think most people know, you invest when markets are weak or commodities are down or whatever, and you can do well if you have the lasting power, but it's so hard to do because when sectors are down, it feels painful to put money into them. I think I've learned to do that a bit more to get myself in that position. I'm not an expert across the commodity space. I know precious metals reasonably well, so obviously I do quite a bit of investing there, but I'm willing to take a view on a copper or uranium or something like that when it feels weak, I'm willing to invest and hold out, and usually try and get behind good people and companies, and where either the people that are recommending I invest know the companies really well, or I do. But I have made some mistakes, and I've probably learned to stay away from things that if I really don't know anything about it, why am I putting the money in if I don't have any conviction? So I've got to, find that conviction, whether it's through my own research and work, or it's through the contacts of the people that I've worked with before, or I've backed before, or whatever. And I'm not a big investor, so it's on a small scale, relatively speaking.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything you feel particular conviction towards these days?
I really actually like precious metals right now, and it sounds silly talking my own book, but I would say, last summer when gold's at 2,000, it's had a nice run up, but right now it's so unloved. And it could be silver or gold, but it's so unloved. I mean, when you walk around the Denver and Beaver Creek shows, there aren't many new faces there. There's a few new people who are starting to sniff at the sector, but it does feel washed out in a certain way, despite the fact gold is at a really good level. So companies are performing well in terms of operations and cash flow, but the equities are disconnected. And I love that type of risk arbitrage, I guess.
So I was going back through all the deals we've done at Resource Insider. And when we first started, 2018, I believe gold was at $1,250 when we first started Resource Insider. Because I remember it broke 1,400, and that was a big deal. And I'm seeing today a lot of the junior equities are doing worse than they were in 2018 at $1,750 gold. And then you've got the majors, the Barricks, the Newmonts, et cetera, that are churning out cash right now. They're going to be redeploying that throughout the sector. And yet we're not seeing any of that trickle down into the junior or even the mid-tier space, right? I mean, Equinox itself has had a significant pullback since its highs in 2020. What's going on? What do you make of that?
Yeah. Sometimes it's a bit perplexing, but I guess we're in this Goldilocks period where, I think someone was quoting to me, the S&P's up 20% and GDXJ is down 20% this year. So why would you invest in it? But that to me is that contrarian point of view is,
that's when you invest.
S&P's up 4 times since 14, 15, I think. And, that's the time when you start to think about rebalancing away from that successful investment. And, gold is way down. So to me, there's a nice, interesting trade there. I mean, I like things like uranium's been beaten up for so long, and obviously it's perked up a lot in the last little while, so a little bit of exposure there. Copper is a great long-term play because there's a lack of discoveries and lack of great deposits like obviously Solaris has come up with recently, but not many more of those around. And this whole ESG green environment is here to stay, and I've really also converted very significantly in the last year to thinking, we've been embracing it, but now we really need to grab it with 2 hands because the world is changing, and we need to do everything we can to be better from I think a green and investment perspective, but also just the cost of capital will go up for all of us companies if we don't embrace it. And we're looking at things, and I like the carbon space and carbon credits, and I don't quite understand it. I'm sort of learning more and more about it, and there's these streaming companies coming up, and I think it's an extremely interesting space. And I've invested in one of those recently, and I do think those will be valuable in due course, and it's early days there. So I'm quite often late to some things like cannabis and cryptos and that even if they're a good investment place, I prefer something that has a longer term fundamental potential to the upside.
Hey there. Thanks for taking the time to listen to this podcast, but I wanted to take a quick break to tell you what my team and I do day in and day out at Resource Insider. It's very simple. We go out and we look for the best investment opportunities in the mining and natural resource sector, and we share those with our members. We invest in every deal that we cover, and we tell our members how they can invest alongside us in what I think are some of the best investments that this sector has to offer. Go to our website, resourceinsider.com, sign up for free, and I will send you every trade we have ever made at Resource Insider. You'll be able to see my track record from inception for free, and that's at resourceinsider.com. So I'm going to take a bit of a left turn here, and I'm just looking at my notes here, and something I wanted to talk about was sort of your early days of your career, and how you kind of got started in this industry. I know you're from Vancouver originally, is that right?
I was actually born in Toronto and spent 5 years there.
I got it wrong, really. But you grew up here, right?
And 5 years in Montreal, so I'm actually a Montreal Canadiens fan, so I have to be careful. But
what?
I know, sorry.
Oh, man.
Canucks number 2. But then I grew up in White Rock out here, so I went to high school, and then I went to UBC. So really, I consider myself, having grown up on the West Coast, I played all the winter sports that you can play outdoors here. I never played hockey, but I played rugby in the winter.
You played rugby in the winter?
Yeah.
Where do you play a lot rugby in the winter in British Columbia?
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, certainly down on this coast, this part of the coast. But I went to a high school where, interestingly, the head coach, and he was actually one of my first, I'm going to call it mentors. He was, I actually lived in Bellingham, Washington, but he came up every day to teach at Semiahmoo High School, and he was the under-19 national team coach, and he treated us as a high school team like professionals. Like, you're serious about this sport, you train, you practice, and we're going to win championships. That was my first exposure to an extremely professionalized program. I always played other sports growing up, and I loved basketball, and I ran and did anything else. And rugby was kind of like, he was like, okay, you're reasonably quick, you play other sports, you should try out for rugby. And I thought, okay, why not? And I did reasonably well at it, but the great thing was that he ended up getting this professional training and a mentor who taught you skills in life and how to succeed and how to be a winner and stuff. And we ended up winning the provincial championship my grade 11 year. And from there, I just fell in love with the sport, and I used it throughout my career. I went to university, I played there, and then I played at various national team age group levels, and I got to travel the world. And
so you were on the Canadian national team.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I never got a full 15s cap for Canada, but I played 7s for Canada. I played under 19s, 21s, 23s, and that. And for me, that just gave me exposure to many other countries. And interestingly, rugby could have also derailed my career. I made the under-19 national team in, I guess it was after my first year of university, and I was just doing sort of sciences and general studies, and I had to take a whole month off before my midterms and travel around England playing against the various regional sides, and against England Colts at Twickenham Stadium, like the national stadium.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I'm not missing that. So I dropped out of university to do that. And my dad wasn't overly pleased with that.
Was the university supportive of it, though, at all?
I made a mistake. And the one mistake I'd go back and change was I should have gone to them and said, hey, can I just defer this term and do it later? Instead, I just dropped out.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And my grade point average, interestingly, to get into commerce, which I did the next year, I got in that year into commerce. I dropped out. And the next year, the grade point average went up to get into commerce. It went above my grade point average. So I didn't get in when I went back. So it was kind of a crazy time. I lost 2 years of my university life. And so I ended up going back. And in the end, in retrospect, it was actually one of the best decisions I made because I got to play rugby for Canada. I traveled around. I got a real thirst and desire to live and travel overseas. And, in a way, mining has a lot to do with that. You do a lot of traveling in cultures and remote places. And so rugby kind of gave me a bit of that taste. Got to play at a reasonably high level, and then got to meet a lot of people. And working eventually, when I worked in London, the fact that I played rugby made you made friends fairly easily, and so it was a great networking tool as well. And I came back and I basically went and worked in a warehouse on the Fraser River for the rest of that year at minimum wage.
At the time, did it feel like you'd made the right choice, or were you like, shit, maybe it was a bad call?
I guess I probably felt pretty good about it, but once I worked in the warehouse for quite a bit longer, I was like, okay, this is not what I want to do with the rest of my life. And then the owners of that business tried to convince me not to go back to university and just to be the manager, drive around forklifts and manage things. And I'm glad I didn't do that. I mean, I really enjoyed it, but I knew that wasn't long-term for me, and it helped me, but it helped give me appreciation for, call it education and opportunities. And it was a good experience, but I'm glad I went back to university. And bizarrely, my wife was 2 years behind me at university. So I guess I never would have met her if I didn't take those 2 years out and take a hiatus. So it worked out.
You mentioned you were in London for some time. How did you end up there?
Yeah. I took my third year at university and went to the north of England, to Lancaster University to play rugby and to just experience a different culture. And I have a European passport, so it was always easy to get to Europe. And I had some affiliation with it because my father came across as an immigrant when he was young. And I just wanted to live overseas in that. And I wanted to go not for a term and go for 3 or 4 months. I wanted to go for a year because I wanted to actually really live there and experience it. And I've always felt that. And if I have a choice, I'd prefer to go and live somewhere for a while because then you really immerse in the culture in that and learn a language or whatever. And so I spent a year at that university, came back, and then I got my CA. And then my wife and I decided we were going to go learn to speak German and live in Europe somewhere. And Switzerland worked out, so we moved there. Because you can speak English, obviously, at work more easily, even though I had German family.
Were you an accountant? Or?
I was.
Yeah?
Yeah, I was doing audits and that. And Swissair Group at the time was my biggest client, and they were a global client. And I was doing lots of deals and helping them out, through due diligence and financings and stuff, but from the accounting firm side. And all the lawyers and bankers were in London. So I was like, you know what, that looks pretty fun and interesting. And so I moved to London. I interviewed and got a job at BNP Paribas. And my wife got a job at a big advertising media company. We moved there for 7 years and just thoroughly enjoyed it. But boy, oh boy, it was hard work too.
Because you were a banker there. So
I was a banker there.
You transitioned from accounting
to banking. Yeah.
Do you see that happen very often? Because I think there's a lot of accountants that would like to do that.
It does happen. I'm not going to say often, but it is possible. It's a transferable skill set.
Yeah.
But the biggest difference for me, and it was so hard at the beginning for me, is I think accountants tend to think in absolute numbers and decimal places where the investment bankers tend to think in a lot of uncertainties, right? You make assumptions and forecasts and that, they're always wrong, but you work with hopefully 2 or 3 core assumptions and you make reasonable assumptions and you have to make investment decisions on those. So that for me was the really interesting transition, is thinking a little bit differently. So it was great exposure.
Did you find that was a better fit to your natural way of thinking, or was it a little forced at first to kind of...
You want me to be candid, right? I'm probably more in the middle. I would say that I straddle those two worlds a bit where, I'm going to give a little shout out to, I think Greg Smith is one of those guys who probably moves a little more to that world and is able to think more in that world of uncertainty better than a lot of people I've met. And he comes from an accounting background as well. And I think most accountants have trouble making that adjustment because you train in a way of thinking and you need to allow your brain to be more open to uncertainty.
It's funny you say that. I find engineers are the same way. We all kind of have a natural pessimistic streak to us about things. and I've debated this with my engineering friends. Do you think pessimists go into engineering, and like sort of linear, sort of logical thinkers go into accounting, or do you think it just like beats it into you through years of education?
It's probably true. I think you do. I think people do gravitate to where they're comfortable. And then I look at a guy like a Ross Beatty, who's probably the eternal optimist, and he's a geologist.
And a lawyer, though.
And a lawyer, yeah. But he's never practiced.
I don't think he said he practiced not a single day, right?
But you do look at that kind of personality and you do see that. But that's where, again, a mining company is so interesting because you bring all these different skills, cultures, and ways of thinking together. And how many industries, I don't know how many, but usually you go to a certain industry and everyone thinks the same way, right? If you're an accounting firm or a law firm or certain technology companies, everyone's a lot of people are coming from the same background. So there's a lot more, call it groupthink. So that's what I love about mining is we're always challenging each other,
So I'm going to bring something up that you said to me probably almost 5 years ago, and that fits perfectly into this. I have it in my notes, and I've actually been thinking about this for years. So tell me if I got this right. You mentioned to me once that if you were to do it all over again in terms of education, you would probably study the classics. In terms of philosophy, literature, whatnot,
history, geography, I absolutely would.
Is that true to this day?
Yeah, I think I would, because
that is not something you expect most accountants to say.
No, I know, but I'd still end up where I am. Like I wouldn't change the ultimate, career path in a sense, but I would start it differently because one of the biggest, most profound things that hit me was when I went over and I worked in the investment banking group at BNP Paribas. Not one single person I worked with in that team came from a finance background, I think. Every single one of them came from a different background. I think I worked with a metallurgist, philosopher, classical studies, engineer, all these groups, and they came to the bank and learned the skills of the job. But when they went to deal with clients and deal with the outside world, they were knowledgeable in an industry, so they would bank in that industry, or they were just interesting in the pub to talk to and talk about politics and other things in a very diverse sort of way. And I always valued that. And what they always said to me, and I did experience that when I went to university in the north of England, was you go to university to learn properly, to question things, to challenge things, to work through problems. You don't go to necessarily learn all the detailed skill sets that you're going to need in your long-term career. Quite often at university, you have no idea what you want anyways, unless you're specifically a doctor or a really specialized skill set. So I kind of wish I had that more broad knowledge and skill set. I mean, I could have been an engineer or a geologist or something and still gone and become an accountant and then a banker and then got into mining. Like that would have been fine too. But I noticed that, and again, it goes back to that year I took off from rugby and I went back to university and I had to get higher grades to get into commerce. And I went and studied literature, classical studies, calculus, French, conversational French.
Were these just things you thought you could knock out of the park?
I went there and I said, you know what? I'm not going to be a doctor or a dentist, I don't think. So sciences, I need to move a little bit away from some of that. And I thought, I'm going to take things I'm interested in. I'm going to really apply myself. And it was my best year ever. And I really enjoyed it. And so it kind of woke me up to saying, boy, oh boy, if you like something and apply yourself, you can do well. And I kind of then look back as I worked in London, and I wish I kind of had done that for my whole undergrad degree and then gone off and you can pick up the skill sets in accounting or banking or whatever later.
This is something I think the Brits do better because I've met a lot of bankers and analysts and whatnot in London that they went to Oxford, they went to Cambridge, they studied philosophy or history or what have you, and I don't think we really have that quite same culture of that here, of transitioning from the humanities into a finance or a business career. It's all commerce grads, engineers, accountants, etc. basically.
And again, it goes back to quite often when people interview, they look at the university they went to in the early part of their career and they look at what they studied. And those things are almost like you have to have a good university, you have to have the right type of degree, otherwise you almost don't get the interview. And I think sometimes you can miss some really good people by being that narrowly focused. I really think you got to think outside the box in that front.
So coming into mining for you, was that a foregone conclusion at any point, being from Vancouver, seeing a large mining industry here, or was there something about the industry that particularly appealed to you at some point in your career?
No, it definitely wasn't a foregone conclusion. And again, I had exposure to it from having worked at Deloitte on various accounts and that. I'd had exposure in the investment banking in London with certain groups as well, but it wasn't a foregone conclusion. What I think really cemented it was when I did come back and I worked, I kind of almost integrated into the team at New Gold when they were doing the three-way merger. I just really enjoyed that. And it was the people, the personalities, what they were trying to create. I was like, wow, this is way more dynamic than, because I worked in banking than most public companies. I thought this is way more dynamic. I also probably underestimated it's way more risky too at times, but at the time it was really intriguing to me, and that's what cemented it more than anything.
And what do you mean by dynamic in that environment?
They were doing deals, they're raising money and financing, they were traveling the world, they're crossing boundaries and cultures, and it had so many different skill sets and different types of people in there. Like I said before, you can end up with companies where it's all one type of person and they work in one city in one office, and you don't travel and you don't raise money and do deals and raise bank financing and equity financing and all that. And so I thought it also encompassed many skill sets, and I felt I'd had the investment in banking, so that would be useful to mining, and then in both financing and doing deals. And then also I love the actual mining aspect of it. And you kind of look at what we do and you go, wow, it's an incredible process.
Well, it's crazy because there's few businesses where there's science, there's finance, you're dealing with sort of international relations and foreign policy, and then you're in these places dealing with local communities, indigenous groups, all the way up to the president of the country often.
Yeah.
There's very little, you don't get that building an app in your mom's basement, I guess, do you?
I don't think so. So yeah, you're right. All those things attracted me to it, and traveling the world too. So,
okay. So I'm going to ask a few questions that I ask a lot of people. So feel free, if you have an answer for them, let me know. If not, that's okay too. But they're kind of rapid fire questions. Where do you see mining companies most often get it wrong? Or put another way, what do you see companies do so often that everyone thinks is right, is a good idea, but you think is not the best way to be doing things?
Maybe not most often or always, but I do think a lot of companies don't have a longer term strategy. And sometimes they're too short term thinking. And I do think you can fail if you just plan to do something and then sell it or flip it or whatever in a year or whatever. If you don't have a plan beyond that, you get caught out sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I think real value is created by having a long-term plan and creating something that's absolutely fantastic that other people want to buy ultimately. And if you don't want to sell it, well, great. But if you do, then there's an opportunity. But if you do something, cut corners to do it quick and in the short term, you get caught out quite often. And then I think obviously in mining, quite often companies are undercapitalized and don't raise enough money or don't plan for the unforeseen.
How do you think investors can tell the difference between sort of, I don't want to call them fly-by-night operations, but the sort of the short-term thinking versus the long-term thinking when they're reading a presentation or watching a CEO in an interview? Yeah,
well, one thing for sure is, are they fairly open and direct and transparent, hopefully, but also do they have skin in the game? When board members and management team members actually have bought their stock, and I'm not talking about seed stock and that, I'm talking about actually in financings where other investors buy at normal prices, that makes a huge difference and usually means there's a commitment in long term. You don't just walk away. I won't walk away from an investment I've made, because it's very personal and it's critical to my future. So that's one really important factor.
For people who are sort of just getting familiarized with the mining industry, they own a stock or a couple stocks, they're starting to build a portfolio. Do you have any advice on the best way they can educate themselves to, kind of dip their toe in the water, start to learn more about it?
Yeah, it's really hard if you haven't had experience because, even my family members, they don't really invest in mining because they're scared of it because it's so volatile. Boy, you got to spend some time, go and get to know people, follow some successful people. And you do see, I think, some, call it less experienced investors who follow a Ross Beatty or Lucas Lundin or someone who's been successful, and that's how they get comfort, or someone that they trust. I mean, you get your research from all different sources as well, but I think you never rely on any one source, and whether it's newsletters or analysts' research and that, it's useful because it can put context and information into play, but you got to go and do your own homework. And I think on mining companies, it can be very tough, particularly obviously pre-production, because what are you evaluating and how do you value it? So again, knowing people, getting closer to the sector, maybe taking some time before you launch into it. If you do find someone, and I know this is part of your business, that if you do research and you do that homework for them and they build a trust with you, then maybe, following someone who's been successful and does the research for you is not a bad way to go. But I also believe that in this sector particularly, but in anyone, when you invest your money, you make the decision. Mm-hmm. You can't blame anyone else.
Yeah.
So no matter what, if you recommend a stock and I buy it, it's my fault if it loses money because I made the decision, not you.
Yeah, it's a tough business. And, part of it's tough because there's a lot of people who take advantage in it, but also there's a ton of opacity by its very nature, right? I mean, in any given mine, you don't really know what's there. You don't know how much it's going to cost to get out of the ground, and you don't know what price you can sell it once you do get out of the ground. And when you have all those sort of unknowns, it's really hard to plan for anything. Okay, my next question. You mentioned earlier, sort of a long-term vision, and a lot of early investors that I've spoken to, they'll be looking at an exploration play and they'll ask me, Jamie, we invested in this exploration play. When's it going to become a mine? Now, you and I know, lots of people who've been investing in the space for a while know, most exploration companies, often most development companies, don't ever become operating mines, at least under that current company or management team, et cetera. You guys at Equinox, whilst not starting in exploration, did start in a pretty early development stage on several assets.
Yep.
What would you say are the characteristics of a company that is able to make the jump from, broadly speaking, pre-production development asset into a producing successful mining company?
Boy, it is very hard, and I think part of it's got to be board and management being able to look themselves in the mirror on occasion. And I think certain skill sets are able to transition through phases, but I think a lot aren't. Like some people are best focused at the geological end of things and the discovery end. Some are, good at actually building mines. Some are good at just operating once it's a corporate entity. And I hope that myself and the team that we have around us, that we're actually a little bit in the middle there and capable of. We're probably not explorationists purely. We're actually taking something that's got a credible shot at being a mine or will be a mine and developing it, financing it, and taking it through. But we're not big corporate people. We're entrepreneurial, creative, and that's certainly a style that Ross and myself, Greg, and others share in common. And I think it's also, you do see companies sometimes fall over when they don't recognize that the people involved are really not skilled in that whatever next phase. And sometimes you have to pass on the keys or the reins to someone else. And I say that one day, like when this becomes a massive company, eventually I'll probably have to hand the keys over to someone to run it. And when Equinox is a big corporate entity, and we're not there yet. But
And do you see yourself kind of as more of a builder than an operator? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, builder in a sense of not just building mines, but building companies and financing them, putting teams together. And that's really fun. It's hard work too. And sometimes I go, oh boy, it might be easier just to be an operator, but it's never easy. So I never underestimate mining.
What's changed the most over the last 5 years from when you started Equinox to where you are today with multiple assets in multiple jurisdictions operating all over the world?
Yeah, it's funny, when you go back to those original days and you're focused on one asset, every little detail matters. Anything that can go wrong is so important. And you talk about every change in the strip ratio or the grade or the resource, and everyone's questioning every little detail about it, including ourselves. And now today it's much more of a, what's the big picture? What are the cash flows? What does this look like in 3 years' time? Stepping back a little bit, but you still have to focus on those little things, but you have to be able to step back from the trees and look at the forest. Okay. That's a big change.
Yeah. Which one do you like better?
I think I like growing the trees into the forest. I like that transitional phase, like that growth-oriented transitional phase. I think it can, I'm not specialized in the early stage exploration per se, and I'm probably not a big company guy. I didn't grow up in a Barrick or a BHP of this world, so I'm kind of in between, and that's really fun, like building and piecing together things and figuring it out.
All right, Christian, I know you've got a busy day planned. I want to be respectful of your time. If people want to learn more about Equinox Gold, where do they go?
Just go to our website, was equinoxgold.com, pretty simple, and reach out to us. We're very approachable, I hope, and I think I've been pretty candid and open here, and we're the same when you call us or reach out to us through investor relations or me directly.
Do you want to leave your cell number now? Or
yeah, maybe. Although it might be on the website. But
all right. Thanks again for taking the time. Very much appreciated.
All right. Thanks, Jamie.
Did you enjoy today's podcast? Me too. If you want more like it, head over to resource-insider.com, my website where you can sign up for our free weekly newsletter, where you're going to get instant access to all of our new podcasts and videos. We're going to keep you up to date on what's going on in the mining industry. And most importantly, we're going to show you where we're investing our own money and what I think are the hottest deals and opportunities in the sector. Thanks for listening.